First broadcast on January 10th, 1964, written by Rod Serling and directed by Robert Florey. I suppose that the lack of a true Serling in the scene here is lessened by the fact that the sets throughout this episode are very samey. We have a whip pan over to Serling, which unfortunately breaks up the shot, but because the set he is in front of is exactly the same as pretty much everything we see throughout, it at least feels like he could be there. And I really like the language that Serling uses to introduce this one, but it's interesting that he doesn't really give any hints as to what this is truly about. At this point, we don't know whether it could be about Stansfield encountering an alien, or the ship crashing somewhere and becoming damaged. We have no indication at this point that the damage that will be done is to two human hearts. So our writer tonight is Rod Serling, but you may recall in the last episode I played to you that reading of The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. Now I'm sure my mostly American audience will know this, but for the uninitiated, O. Henry is the pen name for an American writer called William Sidney Porter, who was born in 1862. Now, I'm not particularly familiar with his work, although I had heard The Gift of the Magi before, but I was familiar with people commenting on other stories, sometimes even Twilight Zone episodes, saying that they had an O. Henry ending, or it was an O. Henry type of story. And what they're getting at is that O. Henry stories were famous for having a certain type of twist ending. So the Twilight Zone may take a little DNA from those stories, but there is a further connection. In Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, Martin Grams Jr. writes that this is a loose adaptation of that story, The Gift of the Magi, but Rod Serling had been involved with an adaptation of this before. Around 1948, he played the male role in the story himself in a radio adaptation which he also scripted, which was dramatized at a local station in Ohio. And Martin Grams Jr. goes on to say that in November of 1960, Rod Serling was approached by the Board of National Measures of the United Presbyterian Church of the USA in New York City to adapt a teleplay from that short story. And Serling did do that adaptation and submitted the script to them in 1961, but I'm not sure whether that was ever made. So not to get too ahead of ourselves here, obviously the setup and the circumstances are completely different from the O. Henry story, but the theme of two people sacrificing something out of love for another, but neither of them ending up winning, is of course where this ship is sadly headed. Tonight's director is one of some note, but we haven't actually seen him in the Twilight Zone since season 1, when he directed Perchance to Dream and The Fever. So maybe 50-50 on quality there, but I'm not sure how many people could have made the talking slot machine look any better. Now I would hope that back in the day I did a bit of a bio on Florey, but just in case, here in his last episode, let's do a mini recap. Florey was born in the year 1900 in Paris, France, and he was sadly orphaned when he was very young and subsequently went to live in Switzerland, where he was brought up. In his teenage years, he developed a fascination with films, and American films in particular, and he subsequently found work as a film journalist, which ended up taking him to the US. And while there, he worked in a variety of management roles, such as European Advance Manager for Rudolph Valentino. So he had this very steady entry into the business, a business that he went from reporting on to working in. And the early 1920s saw him becoming an assistant director on several pictures. And the later 20s saw him stepping behind the camera himself on several films. Now, this era of film isn't my area of expertise, but clearly Florey was having some success because the 30s and 40s saw him cranking out picture after picture after picture. And he even had a brush with one of the most famous horror series of all time when he shot a screen test with Bela Lugosi playing Frankenstein's monster for the movie of the same name. Now, of course, the job ended up going to Boris Karloff and James Whale, but in another dimension, I would have been very curious to see Florey's version. But although he didn't direct that movie for Universal, he did direct Murders in the Rue Morgue for them, an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's work, which starred Bela Lugosi. So Florey was a very prolific director of movies, and one of the other notable credits on his resume was Tarzan and the Mermaids, starring not the first on-screen Tarzan, but certainly the most famous Tarzan, Johnny Weissmuller. But 1950 saw Florey transition seemingly overnight from a hard-working movie director to a hard-working TV director, and he remained extremely prolific. He directed 38 episodes of 4-Star Theatre, 33 episodes of Schlitz Playhouse of Stars, and many, many other things. And here, we actually see him directing the second to last thing that was ever released with him as a director, because following this, he directed an episode of The Outer Limits called Moonstone, and then that was that. Now, I haven't seen that one, but it's not a bad way to go out directing a couple of episodes of two of the most famous science fiction and fantasy anthologies of all time. So while Florey retired from directing in 1964, he passed away in 1979. So I hope those 15 years in between were a happy retirement for this most prolific director. So for your services to the Twilight Zone and movies and television in general, Robert Florey, we salute you. While we're in the realms of directing, there is a very particular look about this episode that we will come back to. But first, let us ponder for a moment the opening. Rod Serling's opening narration begins straight away, but it's one of those narrations that doesn't finish in one go. In fact, it's not until 6 minutes in that we see Rod Serling on screen to deliver the end of his narration. And during that time, we see Commander Stansfield laying down in that ship that will take him further into space, further than anyone has gone before. And then we get a flashback to the conversation that Stansfield had with Dr. Bixler, who delivered the news to him about the mission that he was selected for. Notice in this scene how when Florey films Miss Horn, he does it with a real soft focus to it, that classic Hollywood technique to emphasize someone's beauty or to emphasize the fact that someone else sees them as beautiful. But it's especially obvious here because we're cutting between her in the soft focus and Commander Stansfield, who is in sharp focus. And I think it just gives that impression that she's having this kind of effect on him. So it really helps to give that impression that he is becoming quite enamored with her. So while these two flirt in the corridor, let's meet the woman who played Miss Horn. Sandra Horn is played by Marriott Hartley, and she was born in 1940 in Weston, Connecticut. Now, apparently her grandfather was a behavioral psychologist who didn't believe that children should be cuddled or held, and she later said that she compensated for this lack of warmth at home by joining the theatre. And it's in theatre at the age of 13 where she got her start. And while she was a student at Staples High School in Connecticut, she actually put a call in to Rod Serling himself and asked him to come and speak at her school. and Rod, being the man he was, agreed to do it. And this interaction stayed in Rod Serling's mind when he cast her years later in The Long Morrow. Now at this point, we meet her quite early in her screen career, having had a handful of roles from 1962 onwards. So her star was still rising at this point. In 1969, she had a part in an episode of Star Trek playing Zara Beth in the third season episode All Our Yesterdays. But to be honest, that's just one of many parts she has played over the years, because she truly is a hard-working actress for the ages, with numerous parts throughout the 60s, 70s and 80s, right up to the present day. But how is she in this? I think to believe that Stansfield could fall in love with Miss Horn, we also need to be able to fall in love with her a little bit as well. And I think she has this slightly bashful delight when she and Stansfield first meet and set up their first date that is absolutely adorable. But when she goes on to do the scenes later on where she is talking about her love for Stansfield, I think she's absolutely phenomenal. As we'll hear, some people have problems with, I guess, the believability of this episode, but not for one moment do I ever not believe Mariette Hartley's performance. See some scenes of Commander Stansfield in what we seasoned science fiction watchers recognize as some kind of suspended animation chamber, and there are scenes of him in it scattered throughout the rest of the episode, and we recognize this because we've seen the Rip Van Winkle caper, we've seen Planet of the Apes, but even at this point, suspended animation in some form or another was a recurring feature of science fiction stories. In 1887, Edward Bellamy released Looking Backward, which used drugs to put the protagonist into a prolonged sleep. H.G. Wells wrote When the Sleeper Wakes, where the main character falls into a sleep-like trance and wakes up in the future. And then in 1928, Philip Francis Nolan wrote Armageddon 2419 AD, which introduced the character of Buck Rogers after a state of suspended animation. So these early works laid the foundation for the use of suspended animation as a plot device, allowing characters to travel through time or survive long journeys in countless science fiction narratives. So it's important that the audience understands this. It seems quite simple to us now because we have seen it so often, but of course the Twilight Zone needed to make sure. So it's explained very clearly to the audience what the implications of Commander Stansfield's journey are. That is our situation, but let's not worry too much about that for now, because our couple have a date to go on. And this is the make or break point of the episode for a lot of people. Now, I don't look up reviews or other people's opinions of episodes before I formulate my own thoughts here on the podcast. But occasionally, when you're looking around the web for little tidbits of information, you do absorb some of the comments and reviews that are out there. And one of the criticisms that people have is that this is unbelievable, that these two don't know each other long enough to be in love to this degree, to the point that by the end of their first date, they are already in love. And part of the Wikipedia entry reads like this. Speaking of Commander Stansfield, it says, shortly before his mission, he meets and is enchanted by his young colleague, Sandra Horn. They meet that night. After only 3.5 hours, they declare their love for each other and lament the fact that when Stansfield returns, Sandra will be an old woman. We'll come back to that in a moment, but I think it's a shame that this is a stumbling block for some people, and I'll give my take on that in a moment too. But it's something that wouldn't necessarily have been an issue had there just been a slight tweak in the writing. Because when Commander Stansfield is first told of his mission by Dr. Bixler, there is 6 months to go until that mission begins. But when he bumps into Miss Horn in the corridor, 5 months have passed since that meeting with Bixler and since he was given that assignment. So maybe had they had this chance meeting happen when he came out of the meeting with Dr. Bixler, or soon after, then there would have been that whole 6 months before the mission in which they could have formed their relationship, and maybe that would have been a bit more palatable for some people. But I think that there's other things to balance here, because I don't think them having a longer relationship actually makes this more believable for me. There needed to be an element of uncertainty about things. The relationship needed to be something new enough that it wasn't something that Stansfield would abandon the mission for. Because even though their hearts were telling them that they were right for each other, their heads would be telling them, but we've only been together for a month, and this mission has been in the works for 6 months. There are numerous people relying on this mission. We can't abandon it for something so new, even if we want to. So the shortness of the relationship, I think, is actually quite important. Because had Stansfield maybe been married to Sandra already, they never would have given him that mission. Had he gotten together with Miss Horn 5 months earlier when he first got the mission, and they spent those 5 months blissfully falling in love, at some point during those 5 months, he might have said, well, I can't go now because I don't want to leave you. But having their relationship be quite short puts this conflict within the characters. Even though these two are so in love with each other, they can't get past the logic of the situation. But we've only been together a month. So I don't actually feel that this is unbelievable at all. Let's go back to that slightly snarky synopsis on Wikipedia, where it says they meet that night. After only 3.5 hours, they declare their love for each other and lament the fact that when Stansfield returns, Sandra will be an old woman. So let's listen to what is actually entry is wrong, and I question what is so unbelievable about that. They don't actually say, I love you to each other. They are sharing a very tender moment, but they don't say that. Sandra is verbalizing that she's in a bit of a state of disbelief herself, having known him for such a short time. She feels a sense of loss that he's going. And if you look at Stansfield's face, you can tell that he's troubled because he agrees. What's happened here isn't unbelievable to me at all. It's two people who have found a connection. Now, we come across people who we might find attractive in various ways all the time, sometimes even to the point that we form relationships with them. But then occasionally, there are the people who are even more than that, because they fit us in so many different ways. And that's going to be different for different people. For me, it might be a woman who loves the Twilight Zone, old horror movies, and Planet of the Apes just as much as me. But there are also the intangible factors too that you can't explain. Sometimes someone just fits you. And the point of this is that the characters have to have a certain level of disbelief that they're falling in love so fast as well, because they can't believe who they found. Now, I don't need to be privy to what has happened during their date, because the sincerity with which Marriott Hartley delivers these lines is just achingly beautiful, and the troubled look on Stansfield's face is feeding into what is one of the themes of this episode for me: the battle between the head and the heart. Specifically, falling in love with someone when maybe it isn't the most sensible thing to do. You know that your future together is either highly improbable or impossible. But when you are together, the moments are so perfect that you're just willing to bury your head in the sand to enjoy them and take every second of happiness that you can, even when you know that it will make things all the more painful in the future. So no, the length of time that these two know each other for isn't a problem for me at all, because people take this very short scene of them together on this date as the entirety of their relationship and then call it unbelievable, and then ask the question, why would they do what they end up doing later on in the episode after just 3.5 hours? But the thing is, they don't. We see a glimpse of their night, but they more than likely end up spending the rest of that night together, and it's a month until the mission, so they probably see each other every day in that month too. And I personally feel that a month is more than enough time to fall head over heels and completely in love with someone. In fact, it's probably one of the most intense times in a relationship overall. So I suppose I've made my point, but to cap it off, I think the episode makes it very clear who Stansfield is. He's a man who a few months ago was relishing the thought of going into space on his own. A man for whom duty and career were paramount. A man who had accepted that his life would be a life spent alone. And by the time Sandra Horn came into it, he had enough time to fall completely in love with her. He had a whole month, but not enough time to back for his mission. Let's meet the man who played him. Commander Douglas Stansfield is played by Robert Lansing, and he was born in 1928 in San Diego, California. And from an early age he had show business in his blood. He played the drums in various bands, but it was working on plays in high school that gave him the acting bug. And after a couple of years of military service, he headed for the Big Apple to try and make it as an actor. But of course, he then found himself as one of the many people attending audition after audition to try and get parts, and having to do jobs on the side to make ends meet. And while he did have some success on stage, it wasn't quite the kind of success that made him an established star who could put food on the table full time from his profession. So he made the decision to go to California to try and make it in the movies. So we meet Robert Lansing here after about a decade of working pretty steadily in television. He did his time on anthology shows like One Step Beyond and Craft Television Theatre. And while he did have parts in movies, it seems that he wasn't destined for ongoing big screen success, but instead carried on plying his trade in television for many decades. And 1968 saw him play the scene-stealing part of Gary Seven in the Star Trek episode Assignment Earth, a fan-favourite character who has subsequently been revisited time after time in other Star Trek spin-off media. And his career carried on until the 90s, with parts in shows like The Equalizer and Kung Fu The Legend Continues. But how is he in this? I think where Lansing excels in this for me are those occasional moments where we see how troubled he is by the situation. Mariette Hartley delivers her lines beautifully to him, and it's his reactions to them that captivate me the most. When Stansfield first meets Miss Horn, it's a lovely meeting, but then when she walks away, the smile gradually leaves his face as he realizes that however well this date goes, it can't go anywhere. Then later on, when they have their date and she's looking up at him with such affection in her eyes, his eyes are troubled again, because he knows that he has found something beautiful that he can't keep. And then watch him as he says goodbye to Miss Horn later on, and the movement in his neck and the lower part of his face, perfectly mimicking the movements of someone trying not to cry. When it comes time for Commander Stansfield to go, we come to the scene that they and we have been dreading, and it's one of the most beautiful and heartbreaking scenes that Rod Serling has ever written. A scene that understands that when some people come into our lives, they bring the colour to it that maybe we didn't know was missing, and when they're gone, the world seems to be a grey and dull place. We are given the view of the set that we've seen so often in this episode, the corridor. And the sets in the episode are very sparse. Even the office that Stansfield speaks to the doctor in doesn't even have any comfortable chairs in it. Now, it might be that at this time it would have been costly to build a science fiction set with screens and blinking lights, so they decided to go for something more stripped back and sparse. But if that's the case, I personally believe that this is actually very helpful to the episode. It has more of an impressionistic feel to it, similar to something like the courtroom in Shadow Play or the sets in The Obsolete Man. But more than that, the fact that Miss Horn and Commander Stansfield's interactions mainly take place in this corridor, I feel is a perfect representation of life itself and the way that we meet people. We're all walking down our own corridors, and sometimes we will meet people along the way. Sometimes they will end up walking with us for a while, even for the rest of our journey. But sometimes we will pass each other by because we're going in different directions. And sometimes we will wish that someone could keep walking in our direction, but they don't. So now that Stansfield is in space, we see him in a suspended animation chamber, but obviously at the end we learn that he won't remain there. But at this time, we don't quite know that yet. They're saving that revelation for the twist, but strangely, that wasn't always going to be the case. And in unlocking the door to a television classic, Martin Grams Jr. describes a scene that was in the first draft of the script, but didn't make it to the second draft. So obviously Rod Serling also thought it was important to hold back some of these details until the end. But if the scene had made it, it would have went something like this.
This is a pre-recorded time check and periodic duty reminder. Repeat, this is a periodic time check and duty reminder. You have been in space for exactly 1 month, 11 days, 13 hours, 22 minutes. This is one of 131 interval moments when course, speed, temperature must all be manually checked.
Okay.
If you return to your pod, the closing of the lid will automatically put you back into suspension. Repeat, if you return to your pod, the closing of the lid will automatically put you back into suspension.
This is Solar 2 probe calling Earth.
We can't hear you, Commander Stansfield. We can't hear you. You're not coming through clearly.
You're obviously hearing me, but I'm too far away to receive you. I'll make an assumption that I'm coming through clearly enough to be understood. The following information should be relayed to my base and to Dr. Bixler in I'm not going back into the receptacle. I'm going to try and stay alive and awake. I've got food stores here on the ship, the ones that were put here in case my freezing compartment broke down. I'll keep making my checks until I reach my destination and on the way back, but I'm not going back in that chamber. In fact, I'll sleep 8 hours at a time, thank you. 8 hours at a time. And if I age, I age. And if I starve, I starve. And if I die of loneliness, so be it. So be it. Sandy, my dear. If you're the old woman in the lace shawl, I'll be the old man in the worn spacesuit. God willing, I'll be the old man. Now, I personally feel that Rod Serling made the right choice taking this scene out of the script, because it does telegraph the ending maybe a little bit too much. But as Martin Grams Jr. does mention, at the least, it explains why Stansfield was out of the animation pod, because in the version we do get, there's no real explanation for that. If you go into suspended animation, then you're in suspended animation. When would you be able to make that decision to leave it?
General Walters?
Double payoff. The episode also has its share of problems. Robert Lansing and Marriott Hartley portray their characters with sincerity, but the lines they are forced to speak are often uncomfortably purple. Additionally, the age makeup applied to Lansing, crucial to the plausibility of the ending, is embarrassingly bad. I disagree with Mark Zickery on all these counts. I think the makeup is actually pretty effective, one of the better age makeups in the show. Now, Mark calls the dialogue uncomfortably purple, so he's referring to purple prose being overwritten. And again, I couldn't disagree with that more either. I very much value the Twilight Zone companion, but it was written by a very young man. And while I don't want to suppose anything about his life, I do wonder whether he'd experienced this kind of loss yet, because if he had, these words wouldn't seem overwritten at all. Breakups are hard and painful, but there is a certain unique pain reserved for those who can't stay together, not because they don't want to, but because something stops them from doing so. Rod Serling uses the age difference between Commander Stansfield and Miss Horn in the story, but really this is a space-age allegory for whatever that thing is that keeps two people who love each other apart. Whether it's distance, age, fear, uncertainty, or any of a number of other things. This episode is talking about one of them and all of them, but also the love of a person for another who cannot live with the sacrifices that that other person would make for them, even though they make those sacrifices of their own free will. I cannot think of a Twilight Zone at this moment that has such a deep emotional resonance as this one. This one shatters me. When the Twilight Zone was turned into a stage play in London, this was one of the stories that was adapted, and it was played as part of a tapestry of tales weaved together so that we would get glimpses of it throughout the play as it advanced. A scene here, a moment there, and it was played with much fewer words than this because it didn't need the words. It played like a piece of music. It was the ballad of the woman who would wait forever, and a man who would go to the galaxy's edge and back with only one wish in his heart, to be able to say, I love you, Miss Horn, and I miss you every second. And while this episode might not work for some people, I think the ones it does work for might have found that they will have been one or the other in this situation. People who have had to walk away down that corridor, or be the one to watch someone walk away. And if that is the case, then my sincere wish for you is that I hope this isn't the end. And I hope that maybe something can be salvaged. But if it can't be salvaged, then I hope that one day, the memories you bury now because they're too painful to recall will become less painful, and that you can once again look back on them with fondness. And I hope that the gifts that were chosen for you by someone who couldn't wait to see the smile on your face as you open them can be brought out again and enjoyed and held as they would want them to be. And the souvenirs of the perfect moments that you did spend together, the ticket stubs from that first movie that you saw, or the single leaf of ivy picked up from the forest floor during the best trip that you ever took in your life because you always wanted to remember it. Maybe these can be looked upon too as a reminder that sometimes beautiful things don't last forever in the real world, but maybe in our hearts and minds they can, or maybe in another dimension. So this is top tier Twilight Zone for me, and proof that even at this point, when some say that the show was on the wane, Rod Serling could still pull a classic out of his pocket. This is not an episode where the Twilight Zone sets out to punish someone, because nobody deserves the unhappiness that we see here. But it's an episode that has us bear witness to one of the sad, unfair realities of life, that taps into the experiences of people all over and shows that sometimes the exact right person is out there for you, but just not necessarily in the right place at the right time. And it's an episode that also understands the heartbreaking truth that the only thing more lonely than being alone is being alone and knowing that the person you love and who loved you is still out there in the world. This is Future Tom interrupting the podcast for a moment because sometimes I go through these episodes and I come to terms with my own thoughts on it. And this is an episode where, you know, when you listen to the people from the After Hours Club in a moment, you know, they've got some great thoughts and takes on it and, you know, discussions on how it works for them or it doesn't work for them. But sometimes I will spend a lot of time on the episode and then it's only later on that you start to think some more about it and other things come into your mind and you think, I really wish I'd have said that. So I thought I would take this opportunity while I'm kind of doing the re-edit on it, because over in the After Hours Club I do a kind of rough cut that I put out to the board of directors over there, which I put out to them about a week ago. And then if there's anything that I want to trim down for the main show, then I do it. But I was just thinking about this one because this one does give me a lot of thoughts. And I suppose I do think there is this theme there of meeting the right person at the wrong time, which is absolutely tragic in real life and in terms of the episode. But I think there's a detail here in the episode as well where Stansfield's discoveries, it turns out that they were all for nothing anyway. And I don't think maybe I focused on that when I was formulating my thoughts on this one, because it is potentially quite an important detail. Because while I do maintain that it's not the Twilight Zone punishing anyone, maybe it is a bit more of a cautionary tale than I first thought. Because what it's really telling us is that Stansfield had a chance for happiness. He had a chance to spend the rest of his life with the woman that he loved. But he had this duty. He had this duty to the space agency or whatever it is, to go on this mission. And ultimately, that mission turned out to be pointless, So perhaps what it's also telling us is that we can always think of reasons not to do something, or not to be with someone, or put duty, any number of things, putting our head above our heart. But ultimately, where did that get Commander Stansfield? It just left him as an old man, alone, because he put his duties above everything else. Now, obviously, I think it's perfectly valid what I did say, this indecision about, well, we've only known each other a month. Can I really just, not go on this mission because of something so new? And that's always going to be the battle. But I think then, ultimately, where did putting his duty over the potential for love leave him just a sad and lonely old man? So, maybe that's what Rod was trying to tell us as well, that just think very carefully about what your priorities actually are. And is it worth sacrificing your happiness for them? Okay, just some ponderings, I think there's a lot to this episode, a lot to think about. But I will hand you back over to Past Tom, and I will catch you soon. My thanks to my good friend Brandy Jackala for stepping in at the last moment to do the voice in that little recreation that we did. Thank you, Brandy. So that is the long morrow. And as we know, I go over to my friends at the After Hours Club to gauge what their thoughts are about every episode that we talk about here on the podcast. And with the long morrow, when I asked them whether it was top tier, middle tier, or bottom tier, the results were that 15% said it was bottom tier, 70% said it was middle tier, and 15% said it was top tier. So I guess a very kind of middling vote on that one. So let's hear what people have got to say about it. My good friend Uncommon NASA said, upper, mid-tier. I guess we're getting pretty fancy with the tiers here. He said, maybe even lower top tier. This is a hidden gem. I just wish they could have gotten out of that hallway. Set was limiting, but the dialogue, concept, and surprisingly the makeup were all top notch. Been a while since I've seen this one. I need to dig it up. Thank you, NASA. My friend Jason Schwartz from the Twilight Zone Sandbox says, this is not a favorite of mine. It's lower tier for me. He makes this assumption that she is just going to fall apart without him and become a cat lady or an old maid. He's like, I'll become old and we can be together because there's no way she'll have married or moved on or have a life apart from longing for me for 40 years. The end of this episode should be a warning for couples that communication is the key to a relationship, because you don't want to end up like these two. I do like the acting and the feel of the episode, it's just a nonsensical twist that kills the whole thing for me. Thank you, Jason. Well, obviously I'm going to disagree with you on that one, but that's fine, that's the way it goes sometimes. But thank you for your thoughts. Tim Stratford says, one of the better season 5 entries. Mariette Hartley and Robert Lansing give amazing performances, and the ending can bring you to tears. Possibly the most romantic Twilight Zone that Rod wrote. An episode worth coming back to every so often. Thank you, Tim. And I think it is every so often because, if it does work for you, then it kind of hits you right in the heart. So it is kind of a hard one to watch. Our friend Jordan Dollock says, it's nice to have another sweet, or rather bittersweet episode, but I have some difficulty with the over-the-top whirlwind romance aspect of it. What it reminds me of is any number of pulp sci-fi comics of the 50s. As nice as it is, I don't have much interest in returning to it. Thank you, Jordan. I guess I explained my thoughts on the whirlwind romance aspect of it myself. I think a month is, more than enough to kind of get really deep feelings for someone and fall in love with someone. And like I said, I kind of feel that's when romances can be at their most intense. But also, I kind of feel that I've said in the past, I don't need a Twilight Zone to be completely real world real all the time, because I feel that sometimes it is presented to us like a fable, where certain things are idealized or simplified in order to tell us this fable. So on the one hand, I don't really have a problem with the timescales involved, but on the other hand, if it was a question for me, I think that would be kind of quelled by the fact I do see it in this kind of fable-like way. And I think the sets and everything, the way it's performed like a play in this kind of corridor where people are walking to or from each other, like I say, it could just be, okay, we need a cheap set. But whether it's by accident or design, this whole aspect of we're all walking our own corridors and, we're passing each other or walking with each other, and just how long are we walking with each other for? I think that's the thing for me. It sort of transcends just a kind of real situation, but I guess everyone's mileage on that is different. So thank you, Jordan. Appreciate it, man. Okay, our old friend Killian Malloy says, the episode's stab at romance is undone by the utterly unbelievable premise, with no supernatural shadings to carry the viewer through the task of trying to ignore the show's absurdities. At least Passage of the Lady Anne offered the hint that the ship itself was a magical love boat that inspired love between couples. If you want romance in the Twilight Zone, set sail to that season 4 episode instead. I won't keep flogging a dead horse. Obviously, I disagree on that one, Killian, but thank you. I'm sorry this one didn't work for you. Our friend Joe Mayer says, in today's world, a climate where an act of kindness is often mistaken for a miracle, seeing a person who loves someone else enough to think only of that person's continuing happiness is a theme that I simply cannot grow tired of. There are microcosmic moments throughout our days when we can implement such a sacrifice for the happiness of another, and it certainly does not need to be a romantic love. It can simply be the love of our fellow man. This episode stands as a wonderful little reminder of how love can often be interpreted as the willing expression of sacrifice for the greater good of another. I think you've put that beautifully, Joe, and it's something that I definitely agree with. One of the many kind of underlying aspects of it is not only what you can sacrifice, but how much you can live with yourself for what someone else is willing to sacrifice for you. And the fact that Stansfield knew he was an old man and only had so many years in front of him, and Miss Horn was so young and beautiful with her whole life ahead of her, that's a lot to live with, even though it was something that she said she would give willingly. So yeah, there's a few kind of themes to to this one, and I think that is one of them. Thank you, Joe. That's some good stuff. My friend Al Sherdsma says, Rod's Romeo and Juliet. Instead of warring families, you have the cold equations of space and time. Breaks my heart every time I view it. Top tier. Breaks mine too, Al. Thank you. Our friend Cerebral P says, definitely top middle tier. Lansing performance is stoic and tragic, despite the abundance of stage makeup. I found the disjointed timeline of the story only added to its inevitability, but never seemed to suggest a twist. Perhaps the reveal of Hartley's encapsulation revealed the twist too early, but the tragedy of it all overcame any premonition. I have always seen this episode as Serling's interpretation of the gift of the Magi. Beautifully acted, always gets me in the feels. Me too, man, me too. Our old friend Josh Chambers says, while there are fine performances and some truly inspired directorial touches from the late great Robert Florey, the script, as mentioned by another member of the After Hours Club, does have the feel of an overused comic plot. I'm sure if I rifled through my EC sci-fi collections, weird science, weird fantasy, I could find a similar story. And sure, there are only 7 basic stories, and there is comfort in the familiar, but the circumstances surrounding Stansfield's and Horn's relationship haven't aged very well, and the twist seems a little too O. Henry. So for its production design, cast, acting and overall arc, I think this one deserves a very comfortable middle tier ranking. After all, it was directed by the man who gave us the Marx Brothers' first film. Cheers. Cheers to you, Josh, thank you. Our friend Joe Brown says, this is an interesting episode. A different kind of love story that seemed rooted in irony, much like The Silence. Where The Silence had physical devastating results, The Long Morrow had a love relationship devastated. I did find it hard to grasp that Stansfield falls in love after an all too brief encounter in a hallway, then spends the next 40 years longing for this person. That premise seems like a stretch, but I think that it was needed to get to the point of the episode, which is, what will lovers do to be with each other, and the steps that they take to achieve it. Serling's dialogue is written like love sonnets for each character to share. It works, but maybe tries too hard to keep the brief encounter love relationship believable. I rate it low mid-tier. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the feedback. I've said it in the episode. I think it shows us their initial meeting and it shows us their first date, but then they have a whole month of being together before the ship takes off. We just don't see it, but I do think the episode expects us to know that that month has taken place, and I guess our mileage on whether a month is enough or not will vary. For me, I think it's absolutely fine, but I get that we're all different on that. So thank you, Joe. Our friend John Hayes says, The Long Morrow is interesting because it's a space story that doesn't need any space scenes, and a love story that doesn't need any love scenes. It's what I would call a hallway story. Some Twilight Zone episodes are hallway or room stories, where the entire story takes place in a hallway or room, like a simple stage play. It depends entirely on the great dialogue, which this has. You get the idea without needing action. I think you're absolutely right, John. It is like a stage play, and it could be performed very well on stage. As I mentioned in the episode, it was performed in the London stage play, both runs of it, and it worked very well in a kind of cut down form. And maybe, this time aspect of it seems to be problematic for some people, but maybe it wouldn't in a stage kind of situation, because people would accept that it is kind of a fiction or a fable, and it's really more about getting the ideas across than being completely kind of mechanically accurate. So yeah, good observations. Getting some good thoughts off people this time round. So our friend Roger Moore says, going through the season 4 episodes, we were examining and concluding if the episodes could have been shortened to 30 minutes or if they worked as hour-long episodes. I feel this episode would have made an excellent season 4 episode. The one thing that I feel is lacking with the 30-minute runtime is the relationship development between the main characters. We only have a few brief scenes to truly cement Commander Stansfield and Sandra Horn's relationship and make it believable. Also, I'm not sure if it was a budget issue, casting issue, or purely Robert Florey's decision, but the hallway set is way too large and wide open for only 2 people to occupy it, in my opinion. Mid-tier all the way. It's kind of fascinating how, I don't even think divisive is the word on this one, but how polar, kind of opposite or close to opposite things can be, because I really like the sets on this one. Like I say, maybe I'm looking into it too much, but that corridor is a kind of metaphor for our lives. I really like that. But thank you, Roger. Appreciate the feedback, man. Okay, my old friend Gus Halwerda said, agree with NASA, lower top tier. The performances are heartbreaking. If I ever need a good cry, I can always rely on the long morrow to bring the rain. This, Lady Anne and the Trade-Ins are Twilight Zone love stories done right. Eagerly awaiting your thoughts on this one, Tom. Well, I think by now you know that I agree with you, Gus. Thank you, man. And then last but not least, my good friend Emmy, who I present a podcast on Patreon with about Twilight Zone continuations called Twilight Zone Aftermath. She has some thoughts too. She says, The Long Morrow is one of my favourites from Season 5, only having discovered it a few years ago. This and the Trade-Ins are the 2 episodes that remind us how well Serling wrote relationships. I know there is criticism of the sets in this one, and I do understand it, but I think having that huge empty corridor actually serves a purpose. It makes us think that Stansfield and Horn are the only 2 people in the world at that moment, which is exactly how it feels to them. It also allows them to showcase their growing affection without any set distraction, literally narrowing our field of view, and their performances here are excellent, particularly considering how well they are able to portray their growing affection in the 30-minute window. It's entirely believable and has us rooting for them. I absolutely agree, Emmy. Thank you. It's good to hear you chiming in on a regular episode, so thank you. So if you want to be able to take part in that vote and chime in on the next episode, then go to patreon.com/Twilight Zone Podcast, and it's all there for you. So I mentioned Sailing Fest in that little update podcast that I did, so I won't mention it again. Well, I won't mention it again very much, but the dates are there now. It is the 13th of September to the 15th of September, and it would be absolutely wonderful to see you there. You know, I want to meet as many of you as I can. So as we get closer, then I will bring you more news about that. But what I will say is, if you are considering going, I would maybe start to look at your accommodation now, because I have been looking at it myself, obviously, for my trip, and in terms of like Airbnbs and so on, I was quite surprised at how few there were compared to last time. I was trying to book a place in Binghamton, so you just don't want to leave these things for chance. And it is quite well served by hotels, but not all of them are like in the center of town, you know, walking distance to the theatre where Sailing Fest is going to take place, and Recreation Park. So it's worth trying to get your accommodation booked quite early, but that's all I'll say for now. So I was very pleased to get a couple of pieces of audio feedback. Take it away.
Hey, Tom, this is Scott Gessinger in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I just wanted to congratulate you on the incredibly well done episode of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. I have been looking forward to you covering this one since I started listening to the podcast, because this was the first episode of the Twilight Zone I ever saw when I was a little kid. And my 3 older siblings all gathered around me, and when Shatner opened up the curtain, they all screamed at once, and it scared the horse apples out of me. And it's stuck with me ever since, and it was that episode that really immediately had me glued to the Twilight Zone and loving the Twilight Zone. And to hear your excellent podcast on it was just incredible. And then the twist at the end, I think, was just awesome. I don't know if other people saw that coming or not. I did not, and I thought that it was absolutely incredible. And so I just wanted to say well done to you, sir. And I'm really excited to see how you finish out the series, and I'm really excited to see what comes next, because I'm not just a fan of the podcast, but I'm a fan of yours, and I hope everything is going well and that there's lots more to come. Take care.
Hi, Tom. This is Josh from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, with some thoughts on The Long Morrow. For all of the Twilight Zone episodes that I have seen, I find that I'm usually left with either a sense of wonder or a sense of disappointment in some cases when the episode doesn't live up to my expectations of the Twilight Zone. However, I do recall that there were 2 episodes that left me feeling actually disturbed. One was The Silence from Season 2, and the other was The Long Morrow. That realization begged the question, why did this episode cause me to feel that way? So I did some reflection on the episode and on myself, and I made these observations. The first is that there's a theme here of hope and sacrifice. Commander Stansfield has a hope, presumably, to be reunited with the woman that he loves and to spend his final years with her. And he makes a great sacrifice to that end. Now, as a child, I adopted a religious belief system that is carried through to adulthood, so I'm pretty familiar with the concept of sacrificing for a future hope. Within the belief system that I adhere to, there's a call to continual selflessness and a hope of a reward to be largely realized in the afterlife. The reality, however, is that none of us truly knows what will take place on the other side of this life, regardless of any sacrifices that we make along the way. Whether or not we achieve the thing that we hope for, it's a mystery until we depart from this life, which means that our efforts, just like those of the astronaut in this story, might be in vain. And I find that disturbing. But I think there's another theme in play in this episode, a theme of aging. Commander Stansfield sacrifices half his lifetime, living decades in complete seclusion on a journey that would later be revealed as unnecessary, with, I imagine, very limited means to make constructive use of his time. There's a reminder here that once our years are lived, there's no going back and changing things. Our lifetimes can only move forward, and I find that disturbing. I also think that the context of this episode bears importance. This one is a romance, and I think it's the case that I'm a bit more of a romantic than I tend to think. I understand the strong desire for companionship, and I even remember the feeling of young love. When a fixation on one special person seems to occupy your thoughts continually. So I understand the potency of his adoration of Sandra, and I empathize highly with the devastation that he would have experienced when he let her go in the end. To lose a future with that special someone, I find that disturbing. So in the end, which of these reasons, was the reason that I felt disturbed? Well, I still can't quite pinpoint it. I'll say this about this episode, though. It doesn't make my top list of Twilight Zone episodes, but it will remain etched in my memory because of the feelings that it aroused in me. Tom, thank you for this podcast. It allows me to re-experience the wonder of the Twilight Zone.
Well, hello, Tom. Dave from Germany here. And I'm here to share my thoughts on The Long Morrow, You Drive, and what was the other one again? Hang on. Ring-a-ding-girl, that's right. How could I forget? Quite an enjoyable episode, this one. Doesn't feel too Twilight Zone-y, but it's a classic tale, well told. I wouldn't put it in the top tier. I would just about put it in middle tier, as in derivative, but quite enjoyable. Well told, with that warm humanity that the Twilight Zone is known for. Also, the actor playing the old man, I forgot his name. He pops up again in a later episode near the end of the show, which is my favorite episode, Come Wander With Me. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that one, but I'm also dreading it because, the podcast is almost over and I don't want it to end, to be honest. Because it's been so consistently good over the years. Now on the topic of You Drive, I really didn't like it at first much. No, I just don't care. It's not a very good episode, and that's it. Anyway, The Long Morrow. I'm not sure Robert Lansing really sells his performance here. His character's emotions. I think he's a bit stiff, really. A bit too much of a rugged archetype. In a role that requires perhaps a bit of a softer, more sensitive approach. Also, I know this show is literally about 60 years old by now, this episode, but the aging makeup is terrible. I know people have complained about the makeup in Changing of the Guard, for instance, but I think it's really not good here. Especially bad. Anyway, that's all for now. Honestly, I just want to get another comment in because it's been so long and I've been trying to get myself to do it. And time is running. So, yeah. Not a bad episode, not a great episode, just somewhere in the middle, honestly. Anyway, I hope you're doing well. And I just want to say once more that I really enjoy your podcast. I think it bears repeating. And to just keep on doing what you're doing. And I remain your faithful listener, Dave from Germany. Until the next time, see you.
Rod Serling, creator of The Twilight Zone, will tell you about next week's story after this message.
If you want to get your thoughts onto the show, then send a clip of about 5 minutes or less to Tom at thetwilightzonepodcast.com about an episode that we've covered or the next episode that we're going to be covering. And let's go over to Rod Serling to find out what that is.